Hello, everyone. Welcome to the conversation with Volanarchist. We're going to be talking about morality and anarchism, specifically Anarcho-Capitalism. So, Volanarchist, I read your article, "The Case for Objective Morality," which I'll link in the description on objective morality. And if you could summarize this for me, that would be fantastic.
Um, Summarize it. Jesus, it's a clusterfuck
I
of
know.
all kinds of different meshes of philosophy and epistemology, just all into one big introductory deal of morality and kind of anarchism. I was debating when I was writing it whether I should make an appeal to anarcho-capitalism. It was going to be right towards the end of the essay, and I figured, no, that'll probably turn a lot of people off, and it'll just sort of segue the conversation into, oh, well, this is bunk because you mentioned anarcho-capitalism, so I sort of decided against it and said, well, fuck, I'll let it be. But it was inspired by several conversations I've had beforehand where I mentioned morality, and people come at me with this sort of, well, that's just your opinion, man, kind of response. I'm like, what the fuck is that? That's really what birthed this essay, is a sort of frustration and spite, honestly. So
It's funny. Yeah, it's that good on you though for not mentioning what like to not do like an anarcho-capitalist perspective of things, because even though like I can tell reading it that it's from that perspective, but if you make it all about that, like if you label it as anarcho-capitalist, it does tend to turn people off because they're like, oh well, I'm not an ANCAP, so this doesn't mean anything to me. And it's like,
oh
no,
yeah.
yeah, like if we're making a case for objective morality, which I think you do pretty well, then it's like this, regardless, like you throw in a few background things, like of course the nap and all that, but it it doesn't apply just to libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. Like that's the whole point.
Yeah,
It's objective because it applies to everyone.
yeah. It 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 derives a lot of that philosophy from, well, it comes from a little bit of Christianity, and I mentioned some of this as well. I think in defining morality, if I can pull it up here, it's got bits of Christianity, specifically in the tenets of the Ten Commandments. It's got a bit of the American Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It also has, which I don't mention in it, just because I don't want to really give it away, but I will now, just for the sake of conversation. I'm weird like that. It has Taoism, which I've studied extensively. It has objectivism, obviously, arguing for objective morality. And it also has Albert Camus' absurdism in it as well, which, if for those of you who are listening that don't know who Albert Camus is, um, watch Rick and Morty. That's pretty much that's pretty much absurdism in a nutshell. Although people from a certain show tend to associate it with Jean-Paul Sartre, I would argue that it's more towards Camus because he's cooler and not a commie. So um, yeah, it's kind of this idea that it just sort of summarized absurdism, even though it's not quite the essay. It's pretty much, instead of, as Nietzsche argued, just succumbing or submitting to amor fati and just accepting your fate as it is because we are damned to live this sort of contradicting existence, we recognize ourselves as absurd creatures in a universe that otherwise just sort of harmoniously exists. So instead of just sort of being bitches and accepting our fate, we say, no, we're going to do what we do because what else do we got to do? And we like doing it. So that all is meshed in there and sort of layered into my argumentation towards objective morality.
And it's very extensive. Like actually, it throws in, like you just said, a little bit of everything of Taoism and objectivism and all that. And and with the case for objective morality, it's like I think people get the definition of like, or they misinterpret what we mean by objective, because like you have the there is kind of the objective stance of like from a religious standpoint of it's objective because God said so. And I did a video on morality, and someone actually came back at me saying like objective morality without religion is impossible, and it's like that's not based on the or not depending on how you what you mean by the word objective, and that it has to be it's like logically consistent with itself kind of thing, where like a lot of the people I've listened to talking about morality, where it's a lot of like if then things, that if we accept this, then this is what we have to this is what we have to derive from it. It has to be like logically consistent with itself.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I've gotten that too. I think even on this essay as well. I'm just trying to look back here and see who the fucker was that said it. um, yeah, it's this guy. Well, I probably shouldn't shout him out. That makes me sound too petty. But there's this guy that pretty much says, let me quote him here: "Without the acceptance of God, the one who defines objective morality, all morals are subjective since they are defined by nothing more than individuals or groups that agree about what is right or wrong," which I addressed in like the first couple of paragraphs after what is morality, which is to say that no, it is not universal. This what we define as moral does not apply to a goldfish. You know, stealing
Yes.
a bit of food from the fucking river is not a question of moral or immoral for a goldfish. That's just a means of survival. But if our goal, and this is something I've mentioned in the article, if the goal is to preserve the human species and to further advance it and to ensure its own well-being, then amongst humans we can establish absolute laws in regards to morality and ethics. So that's more or less where I'm coming from. And whether or not you believe in a god or not doesn't really matter. The what does matter is that morals and ethics can and do exist outside of religion, and they almost have to if we're going to, well, not make ourselves extinct, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like it's like you just said with it's like okay, if this is our goal of like survival of the human species, um, and then we have to come up with something that's concrete. We have to come up with something that's objective. And just because like when it comes to like or killing is wrong or something like that's a bad example. But when people say subjective, they seem to think that it's like, oh well, my opinion. It's like it's opinion, which it isn't.
Right.
Like it's all down to, well, if you think it's this, then if you think this is wrong, well, I disagree, and then we go our separate ways. It's like, no, we can figure this out. We can actually look at reality and see what works best. What is
Right, yeah, and I actually don't think that the moral argument is actually a bad one. I mean, I actually used that more or less in the, what was it? Subjective morality argument, where I used the example of Anita, who is arguing that abortion is tantamount to murder. And I sort of argue subjective applied to objective, and then subjective applied to subjective. The subjective to objective was, I think abortion is murder, therefore we should sign a petition banning abortion. And then subjective to objective would be, I think abortion is murder, therefore everyone who supports abortion should feel bad and should know that they will burn in the fiery depths of hell. So, I mean, that's, that's setting aside the whole debate, because I also want to avoid that as well, because I know that would lead to an entirely different clusterfuck.
yeah,
But,
that'll open a whole different thing.
yeah. So, just looking at that argument in itself, just contained in a vacuum, I think abortion is murder, therefore we should ban it. I feel abortion is murder, therefore everyone who supports it should feel bad and know that they are, in my eyes, an immoral fuckwit. So, it's
Right.
those kinds of people are arguing, as I put it in the essay, just so that way they can either get out of an argument, or so that way they can argue their opponents into submission and make them feel bad, and therefore, well, stroking their own dick, honestly, in that they've crushed their opponents by making them feel bad, which who wants to do that in their own rational mind, honestly?
Yeah.
when you're entering a debate, honestly, it should be about learning your opponent's views, why they believe what they believe, and then learning from it. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to change your mind, you just have to learn from it. And when people go in there to quote unquote win, everyone fucking loses.
Yeah, and who was it? I can't remember who said this. But like the idea is that a debate should, like, if everyone is going into it to with the same goal in mind, like to learn to find out what the truth is. Like that there are two winners to every debate. There's the one that walked away because he was right, and then there's the one that walks away because he learned something. Kind of like he learned something new. But yeah, when people go into it like that, like you said, of just like, this is my side, I have to defend it, and I have to be right, then it's like it. No, it's
Yeah, it's rough, and it's yeah, absolutely, and a lot of that compulsion, which is something I also try to fight quite a bit, by the way. It's just this sort of id driven compulsion to just like be right and to get your way in an argument. That's why I usually try to abstain from getting in arguments on minds at work, because half the time I'm just sort of focused on, getting my tasks done at work, but then, all of a sudden I see this one guy posting something I completely disagree with, and I get this like something switches in my brain. This, like, right in the back, this lizard brain kind of switch flips. I just want to go, "Oh, motherfucker, I'm gonna fucking school you. I'll show you what." And I just find myself obsessed with it, and that sort of ends up. I start off with actual points and say, "No, this is wrong because X, Y, and Z." And then towards the end of it, it just sort of, like I talked with you about before we started recording, it just sort of devolves into me throwing memes saying, "Not an argument," or, "That's still not an argument, right?" And then it just becomes a cat and mouse game for me, which isn't healthy, by the way. I'm
No.
not I'm not promoting that whatsoever. But yeah, it's very ego driven. That sort of compulsion to get into a conversation and to sort of want to dominate. So
That is something I like. It's something we all have to work at, but it's I don't know what the right for. I guess natural, but like it's something that, like that's something human beings do. That like when you get in an argument, which is a like a sort of conflict, you want to win. Like everyone wants to win. There's every single person wants to win at or show that they are right, to show that they're not superior, but that to win the argument. So it's like going into it, I can understand. Like I get that too. Everyone gets it where they want to win. They like if you lose, if you concede that you lose an argument, like if you've ever read, there's a few like biological things that happen. Like if two men get into an argument, the loser, like their testosterone goes down, they get a bit like depressed.
yeah,
like
yeah.
it actually happened.
That,
like there's some real biological things that happen when you lose an argument. So it's like I can get not wanting to lose, but there are times where like I'll get in an argument. There are a few times where like I'll get into an argument with someone and I won't let up, and part of me knows that I'm wrong. Like if it turns out that I am wrong, part of me knows that, but I don't want to concede.
right.
And we'll
yeah.
go away, like we'll go our separate ways. And then like because like I've got skin in the game, like I don't want to lose. But then the next morning after that's all passed, where I don't really have like it's not really beneficial for me to not concede. The next morning I'll go and I'll say, okay, maybe maybe I wasn't
right.
entirely right on that. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess as long as that happens in the end, as long as you learn from it, then that's fine.
Yeah, it evens out, and yeah, like you said, as long as you learn, it's sort of all right. But yeah, that's why I mentioned the lizard brain, because it's a very primal thing, especially when you have emotion attached to an argument, and that's something that comes up a lot with pro-government people. I sort of want to refrain from calling them statists because that seems a little bit derogatory and counterintuitive to a point. But with pro-government people, with religious people, when it comes to social programs and whatnot, people don't think rationally. They don't attach rational thought to an idea. They attach emotion to it. So, like for abortion, for a lot of people, and it's kind of the reason why I chose to put that in there. It's like, oh, it's abortion. It's a baby growing inside a mother's womb. It's something precious, and you have to protect it, and all these sorts of things. And it's not healthy to attach that. And so whenever you've got someone that comes at you hot, whenever you mention, let's say we're pro-abortion, and so you say, I believe that women should have the right to choose to abort their children, and you get these people coming in like, oh, you fucking motherfucker, you're a baby killer, it's what you are, and then you sort of feed off of that and go, whoa, 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 wait a minute now, and then you sort of try to debate them in a rational way, but then they keep coming at you hot, and you're like, fuck it, let's go, motherfucker, gloves off, and it just becomes this very primal thing because you're both now attaching emotion to this debate, and it just becomes this sort of Neanderthalic fight to the death with words. And so whoever quote unquote loses, yeah, they do get that sort of drop in testosterone because they couldn't express themselves adequately. And well, that's not the only reason why. It's because it's more of frustration that they end up doing it, and because
Right.
they don't have time to really get out the points they want, or to make you um, concede in the way that they want you to do. Like, for most trolls, it's sort of like they want you to either rage quit out of the conversation and say, "Oh, well, goodbye. I'm not going to talk to you ever again," or they want you to just end up crying like a little bitch and saying, "Why can't you just agree with me? God, all I want to do is just get to a point of consensus and love and peace." And that's sort of what they go for, honestly. And that's speaking from a former troll. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the goal on both sides when you get to that sort of ooga ooga kind of debate, and that's something that's avoidable, and that's something that I really bring up quite a bit in my essay in regards to Anita, as well as the theft discussion between Jean-Luc and Nicola.
Yeah, and like speaking of the abortion debate, it's like I don't want to get into that much. I want to just talk about it from like the debate itself, not actually get into the debate. But like that's one of the reasons why it's one of the hardest arguments, like one or not arguments, it's one of the hardest things to debate because it is so emotionally charged. And like I come from like I some people would call me pro-life, some would call me pro-choice, depending on like how, because I guess the definitions actually, if you find that, they actually kind of overlap in the middle, because you have the pro-lifers who are like, I want it banned. You have the pro-lifers who are like, okay, I get that, like we have to reach some sort of like we have to reach in the middle somewhere. Then you have pro-choicers who are like, it's bad, or it's something not obviously not to be proud of, but like not a
Right.
very good thing, but like there's still the right involved. And then you have the pro-choicers, like the radical feminists, who are like just abort everyone.
Yeah.
but but yeah, there is a lot of like actually overlap in the middle, and I think one of the reasons we're not see or it's so hard to see that overlap for some people is because like it's so emotionally charged. Like you said, like it's hard to take a step back and think about it, because remember that if you're fighting for the life of a baby, then that's like you have to be right kind of thing. Like you got a lot of skin in the game. Whereas if you're fighting for, again, like women's rights, you've got a lot of skin in the game kind of thing. It's if you're trying to fight from such an emotionally charged perspective that you end up clashing rather than actually getting things accomplished.
Oh yeah. And for those of you who are actually interested in the abortion debate, I'd recommend you look at the mock debate, I should say, between Steven Crowder and Stefan Molyneux. They actually bring up quite a lot of those commonly used and some not so commonly used arguments on both sides. I think I can't remember if Stefan was actually arguing from the point he actually believes in or not, but I know Stephen was actually arguing from his point, which is anti-abortion. But yeah, it's usually the small details that usually people pick about. Like, no one is really arguing except for like really fucked up people, like the ones that say "kill all babies" and actually mean it. Um, no one wants to abort a fetus in the third trimester unless it's like an actual medical emergency. Like the baby is coming out, it's causing internal bleeding, it's sending the mother into shock, and it's either the mother's life and the child's life. Obviously, from a logical perspective, you pick the mother because she provides more value to society. But it's always those small details, like when is it okay to abort a child? Why is it okay to abort a child at X time? And what constitutes what's a human, or, an actual human being as we recognize it with rights and whatnot, versus what is, a fetus, which some would equate to, just like the blood cells running in through our veins right now. So it's always those fine details that usually cause more debate than anything, because ooga ooga, we want to fucking win the fight and be right.
Yeah, and it's hard. Like it's because believe it or not, I actually did meet someone, and I couldn't believe there were actually people that thought this back at that time where I first met it. Because my university had a thing where like they were debating hot topics kind of thing. They wanted to get the debate going, which good for them. And one of them was abortion, and I happened to be put into that group.
Oh
And of course,
shit.
I actually like I met like at that time I didn't really have like I was more pro life in the sense of like I don't want to ban it, but or like I don't know. Like I guess again that shows how well I've actually like how much time I've actually put into it, because I'm in that gray area of it's like what can we do to stop abortions as much as possible without doing a ban, with it like what's best for the child kind of thing, because there's like so many rough areas like you said with if it comes down to where it's either the life of the mother or the baby, that kind of thing. But anyway, skipping that. But I actually met someone there who anyway, I don't want to get into that too much, but I actually met someone there who was like yes, you can abort a baby up until the day it's born, or like the day before it's born.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay,
That's rare.
And not too surprising that she runs the feminist club.
Oh, that explains everything then. Shit.
But I thought that was it. But yeah, listening to like most people talk, it's like okay, we can all agree that except for that one woman that's wrong. We can also,
Right.
and I think everyone there for the most part was like, yeah, maybe like the morning after pill or something, that's fine. Like a few days into it, that's fine. But then it's like, yeah, once you get to the middle ground, then it's actually a lot more difficult. And it's like, you have to understand that I think there's not a single person in there that's like, that has the maybe that woman, I don't know, but excluding that abnormal side of it. But
Yeah.
most people there were all like, okay, we're all on the same side of like, we don't want to hurt children. So,
Yeah.
and we don't want to take like we want to give as much rights like actual rights to a woman as possible. So it's like, okay, we can work this out. But yeah, like you said, you have too many people that they just go into it gung-ho, and we can relate that to many arguments or many other arguments, like especially with government programs. Like if you're at least from my perspective, like advocating for privatization or for eliminating certain like government welfare programs, it's like, yeah, these things are unsustainable in the long run. These things, in the long run, they're just not going to work, and we're either going to get rid of it slowly and softly, or it's all just going to crash,
Right.
and we're going to have a problem. And then you have the people on the other side who are like, okay, well, if you don't suppose, or if you don't want the like every single government program ever, if you don't want like cradle to grave kind of thing, then you're a terrible person and you hate poor people.
Yeah.
It's like you can't argue from this emotional perspective. You have to like understand that we're kind of both on the same side and that we want what's best for people. But yeah, like once you get into that, like, oh, you must hate poor people, then it's like, oh, you can just dismiss their argument because they're on the wrong side or whatever.
Right. And I brought that up with the Jean-Luc v. Nicola case, where in the arguing from a subjective to objective perspective, whereas the objective to objective, I just said that Jean-Luc stole from Nicola's cash register. Is he wrong? Yeah. And then in the objective to subjective, he stole, but he's got a lien on his apartment. He's got all kinds of bills that are late. He just got out of jail for public intox and public exposure of self. And, should he be bad? And it's all these superfluous extra things that people tend to tack onto the argument to make it seem, or to muddy the waters, honestly, and to sort of make you feel when you honestly shouldn't. I mean, yeah, it's kind of sucky that he had all these bad things going on, but in the end, he stole. He could have
Yeah.
straightened his life out to where he didn't have to end up owing on his car, to where it could have been repoed. He didn't have to end up, owing money on his house, having no food in his fridge to where he had to rely on Snap to get his food. He could have done a lot of things in order to prevent this from happening, but instead he decided to do whatever he felt like and whatever felt good, and ended up stealing from him out of complacency, or fill in the blank. Honestly, he just did it
Yeah.
because X excuse, and that excuse does not negate what is wrong. And that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to light here with this essay, is that, yeah, when it comes to abortion, there are a lot of circumstantial things that might factor into it, but there is also the moral aspect of it, which should be held at the highest priority, as opposed to, most people sort of tend to just toss that aside and just go with feels. And that's where sort of I take my, how do I say? I sort of adopt the objectivist view of it, like, especially now I'm towards the end of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Um, I'm sort of getting a good idea of what she sort of sees in this rung of primary, tertiary, or primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary being morals and ethics. What's most important, what is usually popping out the most in the novel, are the actions that are being committed, why they're being committed, and that sort of thing, the consequences of what those actions are. And then comes the secondary, which are thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc. Those are, they're not to be discounted, but they can't supersede the moral and the ethical, because that's what sort of keeps it in check, your thoughts, emotions. The moral ground of saying, hey, you stole. I get that, you got to lean on your house, but it's still fucked up that you stole from someone else. They could choose to waive off the debt and say, hey, keep the money. I want you to keep your house. But that's sort of a subjective choice. They chose to sort of absolve you of your immoral act, and, said, hey, keep the house, keep the money, all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't excuse the fact that you committed an immoral act. And then last on that rung, which, you can sort of tell by how often she describes people and actions, are the sort of the aesthetics of things, and the sort of etiquette and social graces. When it comes to Hank Rearden, he hates a lot of those parties that he ends up going to because of his wife or because of political events. Just sort of keeping on this appearance that he's this grandiose, enterprising individual, and that he has to sort of mingle with all these politicians and people who have connections in Washington and things like that. And he disdains it for very good reason. It's because there's no benefit to him in doing so. There's nothing good about it. There's just
Right.
nothing other than, hey, if you mesh with these people, not only will you look good and you'll be polite, but you'll get favors in the future that will get you off the hook later. And so that's why that's on that tertiary rung, is because that's not really all that important when you're, when you're analyzing yourself in those three categories. And if you only focus on the bottom two, or just that third one, you're more likely to be a very immoral person if you're just focused on etiquette and how you look, as opposed to what you do and who you are as a human being.
Yeah, and that's kind of the most important thing to look through. I read what was it, Scott Adams' most recent book, Win Bigly, on just like talking about like that third rung of just people and their irrational, like, not irrational, or like the fact that people are irrational most of the time, like from the lowest level, or like that third level of people are all just out to get like they have their desires and they're out to get them, kind of thing. But talking back to the first level then, of, like you said, from her perspective, or from her from an objectivist perspective, of when it came to like morals and ethics and that, like your example with Jean-Luc there, like you find that in the end that's what it comes down to. Like in the end, like if you steal, like stealing is wrong. Yeah, regardless of your purpose behind it or your intentions or whether you made a mistake in that, like that is wrong. Or that's the case for it. At least we're making from an objective standpoint that that like if we accept that, like if we accept these or that if we make the case for that and that it's objective, then it's like regardless of outside, like you said, sympathy for people, like oh he had this in the past, this was past experiences, like when you even mentioned where is it, I can't find it, I'll mention it later, but when I do find it.
What is it?
What was it that he was a Jean-Luc, like he made the perspective of like the fact that he was a minority.
Oh yeah, the different.
Somewhere.
Yeah,
And
that
that,
was
like,
sort of an appeal to like the sort of BLM
appeal
versus
to
white people sort of deal. Like he was a minority member, fill in the blank, black, Hispanic, Aboriginal,
is, yeah.
whatever. And then you've got Nikola, who, yeah, by the way, I also named them after like Jean-Luc Picard and Nikola Tesla. So
I was
mean,
thinking about that as you put that in, like as I was reading that, I'm like, I wonder if that's where it got the name from.
Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, being an Eastern European, so that sort of brings that aspect into the light. It's like, oh, white person bad, he should give him money, and that sort of deal. So that's just sort of tacking on to the superfluous, perspective in that nature. Is like, so what? He's white. That guy's black, Hispanic, whatever. Doesn't negate the fact that he stole. I mean, and I referenced earlier on the difference between like a 7-year-old and a BLM member. If a 7-year-old pushes down his little brother, he's in the wrong and he should apologize and make it up. BLM member pushes down some random pedestrian. Oh, he's fighting the right fight. Oh, he shouldn't get any jail sentencing. He was just doing what he thought was good. He's lashing out at society because he was put down so often in his life, and because slavery, and because this and that and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, you're focusing on things that really don't matter in that situation. Who gives a fuck if, he really did have ancestors that were slave, and, most people don't really even fucking know. And, what does it matter if, he had a hard life in the projects or, wherever? The fact is, he pushed someone down. He assaulted someone. So that, wherever his background or anything like that, that's negated the moment he commits an immoral act, a violent act. And that's what needs to be focused on instead of him being a black person, him being Hispanic, him being Aboriginal, whatever. That's not the central focus. The central focus should be person A pushed down, beat, stole property from, or destroyed the property of person B. Person A is in the fucking wrong, end of story. But people like to add these different things in because emotions and because of, etiquette and social graces and appearances. And that's not right. We've got to fix that if we are to achieve that ultimate goal of advancing the human race, ensuring our well-being, and ensuring that we don't go extinct.
Yeah, and that seems to like the idea, like the whole where taking in like their minority status or whatever, like their past. That seems to be coming from like a collectivist perspective that they try to apply to it. Yeah. Like if a member of Black Lives Matter attacks a cop or whatever, it's okay because the group cops actually have attacked the group Black Lives Matter or the group Black people or whatever you want to say in the past. Therefore, this is just retaliation. And it's like, if you look at things from a collectivist perspective, and especially if you have like the ideological lens of like where they come up with patriarchy and all that, like it justifies just about everything. Like it takes all of these immoral acts and it justifies them because it's retaliation. That if like person A from group A did something to person B from group B, then it's like person C from group A is allowed to, or person, what is it? Or group B, someone else from group B is allowed to then retaliate to group A. And it's like, no, if once you start looking at things from a collectivist perspective, it's like, and just put it down to groups, it's like, okay, now you're justifying the whole us versus them mentality.
Mm-hmm. And it can be applied to the positive of that as well. And I mean, like, sort of positive and negative as you look at, like, positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. Whereas, like, during the Obama elections, you hear a lot of that rhetoric going on of, oh, we should vote for Obama. Why? Well, because he's black and that's good for the tribe. That's good for black people. He'll be more for black whatever for
Interests
for
or
for
whatever.
welfare programs. Yeah, all these sorts of different things is like, well, yeah, maybe, but it's just gonna end up with him doing the same things as other politicians, if not worse, and that was the case. So, you get, I mean, the result of it was, you saw a lot of people from like the Black Panther movement, going to the polls and like sort of mean mugging everyone, saying, "Hey, you better fucking vote for Obama, Whitey," and all these sorts of things. And that's where the sort of the violent aspect of it comes through. It's like, you got to vote for this because it will be good for our tribe, and you owe it to us because feels, because my ancestors may or may not have been slaves. Although, you look back a couple of generations, you'll see that they came from fucking Jamaica or they came from Nigeria, and they totally were not slaves. And it's like, oh well, your argument's bunk. I mean, it's bunk out of the way, but it's double bunk now. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever read Rules for Radicals?
No, but I often see memes of Obama holding it in his hand, so I assume it's something.
That's something like that's what like I wanted to mention that in terms of like our objective morality. Are you got to read it. That's one of those books where you can't really get a good you can't read an analysis of it or watch an analysis of it and get the perspective of the book because it's so
Right.
emotionally charged, like you were saying earlier. But when he actually does make the point of, I don't think it's such a bad book because it's like Machiavelli's The Prince, in that it talks about it's meant to be pragmatic. So
Right.
it's like if you take the book from that point of pragmatism, it's like, okay, I get that. Like everything he says in the book is in a sense true. But once you apply the moral lenses to it, it's like, okay, even if this is true, we shouldn't do it, kind of thing.
Right.
But he makes the case of like us versus that, or what is it? No, the ends justify the means, kind of thing. And he makes the case of like, do the ends justify the means? Well, if you're someone that's poor, living in squalor, and like you have just a terrible life, and you have the option to get a better life by taking it from someone else or whatever, then the ends do justify the means, because like you're not really concerned with ends justifying the means if you're in such bad shape. And it's like, on the one hand, yes, that's true, that yes, if you're someone that's desperate or whatever, then the ends start to justify the means. But that does not take away the moral argument of, if you do something wrong, like morally wrong, no matter how desperate you are, that doesn't justify it. Like they're trying to justify, oh, this guy's background of, oh, he only makes $8.50 per hour, kind of thing. In your
Yeah.
article, he only makes $8.50 an hour. He's behind on his payments. Like, in the sense, yeah, to that, from that guy's perspective, the ends start to justify the means, but that doesn't make it right.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even say that, or that would be pragmatic. It's just arguing from subjective to objective, kind of like the example with Anita. It's like, I feel this, therefore this should be done. That sort
Yeah.
of deal. So, and that's also employing in that, if I gather it correctly, sort of an infusion of brutalism with it, where
Oh
we
yeah.
feel
Yeah.
that we are entitled to this in order to, fucking, I don't know, enrich the tribe or ensure our existence. Therefore, it justifies our brutal action, our violation of moral principles in order to sustain our existence. And it's usually not as logical sounding. It's that. It's usually just a bunch of fucking breast pounding kind of bullshit, ooga ooga kind of deal in order to justify how some idiot feels they should justify stealing. And so it's ugh, God, that sounds dull. I think I'd probably
But no,
burn the book after reading like a couple of pages of it. Just because, I mean, I'll read like for example, like things from like Yahoo. And if you guys have not read any articles from Yahoo, for one, don't. For
I
two,
have not for a very
if
long
you
time,
should
and for
happen
good
to have,
reason.
yeah, I mean, just reading what they purport to be articles is just a piss poor excuse for journalism. It's just like maybe three broken paragraphs of, oh, look at this thing, it's horrible, or oh, look at this thing, it's so great. Shouldn't you do it? You should support it. If you don't, you're a bastard. It's sort of that kind of deal, and that sort of sounds a lot like what Yahoo sort of does, and it's a very collectivist sort of thing where it's just sort of a bunch of if-thens charged by emotions, honestly, and it's terrible for the species.
Yeah, it's that's something like with if we can get into this, like something the alt right has been doing recently, like the actual alt right, like you probably know what I mean because you're on Minds.
Oh yeah.
The people there that they take the identity politics standpoint, and again, it's like it's just us versus them kind of thing. And it's like if you take the whole group rights thing, then of course the ends start to justify the means, and you start justifying some objectively immoral things because there it's us versus them. It's like our group versus their group.
Yeah, and that's just the other end of the extreme, honestly. It's just
Exactly.
taking, black pride and putting it towards white pride, and, fine if you want to have some kind of pride in your ethnicity, cool, I mean, I'm a mixed guy. It's racial identity to me has always been this very I've always had this sort of estranged relationship with race, especially growing up in school in the South, where I look white, but I was always told by my parents, oh, you should have pride in your heritage, and it's like, well, that really doesn't fucking matter because no matter what you come from, assholes are always going to pick on you for whatever fucking reason they can get away with. It's like, oh, you're fat.
Right.
Oh, you have fucking glasses. Oh, you fucking like Star Trek. All that sort of deal. So, I mean, in the end, it really doesn't fucking matter either which way. So, yeah, it really does boil down to that ends justifying the means in order to sort of get people to, hop on board and really get the ball rolling with what they want to do, whether it's, moving towards an ethno state or fucking white genocide or whatever, and, it all sounds good at face value, to say, oh, we should protect the white race, blacks and, these lefties are all going after the whites. They want to exterminate the whites. And it's like, okay, yeah, they're, you see examples of this throughout the internet. It's like, oh, yeah, they really do want to fucking kill all white people. So, yeah, we should stop that. But then they go, more towards like, oh, we should have an ethno state. And it's like, I don't fucking know about that shit.
Well, yeah, it's like the perspective that I see, like it's not a moral perspective that the like the other extreme seems to have, like where I think we tend to come from a more like the libertarians and that tend to come from a more moral perspective of like, hey, these group rate things, the us versus them thing, that's all wrong, like that's bad.
Right, yeah.
Like we're and it seems that like the alt right seems to come from the perspective of, oh, why can't we do this too? Like,
right, yeah.
It's not that they see it as wrong, it's that if they get to do it, why can't we? Where I seem to see it more as, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like we seem to see it more as like, no, this shouldn't be happening. Like, this is wrong to begin with. It's not that some people can do it and others can't. It's that we shouldn't be doing this.
Right, yeah. It's just it's just so tedious and boring. It really makes me want to fucking puke. It's like the whole argument over, who should use the N-word. It's like, I really don't care. I mean, it's like whoever, if you really are adamant about using the N-word or fucking fill in the blank, you find people that are comfortable with fucking using that word and hearing that word. Otherwise, don't fucking use it. It's the end.
Yeah.
The fucking end. That's all it should sum up to. But people want to raise a hissy fit. It's like, oh, it's tied with racism, or fucking fill in the blank once again. And it's just like, I really don't care. What I do care about is getting engaged with people who are fucking actually intelligent, who are actually promoting ideals similar to mine, who are actually invested in finding and networking with people who are interested in not only intelligence but with capability. Like, good work is always hard to find. So finding someone that's not only smart but is actually able to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to different things is something that I, as well as many others, highly value. So that should be the priority of people, not just whether they're white or black or Hispanic or whatever, but whether or not they're actually willing to, do shit with their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, and just bringing it back to like the objective morality thing of it seems that like when we when it comes to people with ideas kind of thing of we're kind of all on the same page, or most of us at least, we're on the same page of like, yes, we're out to find the truth, we're out to figure out what works, kind of thing. And especially when it comes to like objective morality, if we can all get on the same page of like, hey, let's figure out what's right and wrong, then we're at least working towards something. We're at least on the same page of like we have a common goal. Whereas it seems that the radical, or the people that tend to be so like so adamant in like a subjective standpoint is, well, it seems to get into where they have like they're not here to talk about what's moral. They're here to talk about their interests, what they want by any means necessary. Right. At least I can see the nice thing about the case for objective morality is that if we can at least like say, hey, let's at least have a good conversation about this, then we can come to some agreement of like, okay, this is off the table, kind of thing. Or
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people, more or less, it's not that they don't know what's moral and what's not immoral. I think it's because, you got things like the Ten Commandments, you got things like the Torah, the fucking Quran, etc., even to like the fucking Tao, discussing these ideas of what is good and what is not. People know that. They've known that for thousands of fucking years. That's what makes the whole idea, as I mentioned before in the essay, of, oh, they were just ignorant. Oh, fucking things like divine right, was the root source of, this whole ignoring what is moral and what is not. Oh, it's the fucking choosing of the lesser of two evils that absolves this. And it's like, no. People have known since the fucking Bible was made what is right and what is wrong. The issue is that they're fucking making loopholes for themselves, or supposedly making loopholes for themselves, in order to justify their committing moral acts. So you got the BLM member who's fucking trashing Starbucks windows and beating people up on the street, and they're saying, oh, it's because of slavery. Oh, it's because we're black. Oh, it's because we're poor. And it's like, no, it's because you're a fucking dick. That's the only reason why you're trashing these fucking windows and beating people up. It's because you're a fucking dick, and you want an excuse to sort of exempt you from the negative consequences that come from being a dick. And that's sort of the whole point behind this objective morality, is that it's confronting and accepting the fact that we have consequences with our actions, whether it be moral, which it's usually positive consequences, or if it's immoral, which in most cases leads to negative consequences. And most people just try to muddy the waters and say, oh, no, it's, you got moral gray areas. And it's like, no, it's either moral or immoral, ethical or unethical, or it's something other than that. There's no middle ground there. The only middle ground people make is when they try to sort of cheat that system, when they try to make a positive into a negative sort of deal. And that's where that whole arguing from the subjective really comes about, is where you got these people, let's say, fucking, since I'm tired of using BLM, let's say feminists who argue that, males should be circumcised, or that, men should stop mansplaining. Well, you're arguing for people to not be allowed to say certain words or express certain actions on pain of death or imprisonment, just because you feel that you as a woman, or male feminists exist, so whatever, you use that as an excuse because you feel a certain way, you want to use that as an excuse to violate someone else's rights, and you want to sort of wiggle out of the negative consequences because feels, once again. And it's complete bullshit. And in order to really sort of continue on as a species, in order to sort of advance and to ensure our own well-being and existence, we've got to get rid of that. We've got to get rid of that, and we've got to confront people with the fact of saying, hey, reality is reality. Just because, like, what is it? I mentioned an example of, like, Albert in Chicago with it being 20 degrees and blah, 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 saying it's too cold to go out, or to go out and bike his way to work. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you can't do it, or just because you feel something doesn't mean whatever, that it justifies you committing an immoral act. We've got to steer people away from that sort of thinking in order to really ensure our existence, in order to progress further. Because if we keep on this way that we're going, then the people shouting, "Oh, the doomsday clock is getting closer to 12," they'll be right. we will end up destroying ourselves one way or another. Whether it's through nuclear weapons or it's through civil war. People are just going to kill themselves over the fact that they feel like they're right, even though objectively they're not.
Yeah, and when it comes down to feelings, it's like, well, like it's not that hard to have a feeling. It's not that hard to say, I feel this, therefore. Like it's very simple. Like it's a very basic way of looking at things. Like if you just take the, well, I feel this, and then or if you feel this and your opponent feels the opposite, and it's like, okay, where do we go from here?
Yeah, because there's no room for debate. I mean, there's no,
No.
like with Anita, arguing that she makes other people, or she wants to make other people feel like shit for supporting abortion. Well, there's no way you can objectively do that. There's no way you can test how shitty someone feels after you've yelled at them. Hell, for all you know, they could feel better about themselves after you yell at them. They could be masochistic, for all you fucking know. So there's nothing to be accomplished from arguing from that point of feeling. There's just nothing that will be accomplished other than stroking your own ego, which most Marxists and people that follow the Platonian way of thought usually tend to do. They just sort of argue to make themselves feel better, to make other people feel shitty so that way they can feel better, and to get other people to follow them and stroke their own dicks and say, "Oh, you're so great, you're so smart, oh, I fucking love you, man, you're fucking great." And it doesn't really do anything for the species as a whole. So it's horrible, it's self-destructive, and it's got to be done away with.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's one of the things I'm kind of appreciating about like a lot of like there seems to be a new movement, like especially with like the Jordan Peterson crowd of people that are like it's focused less on politics, even though it seems to be in the political crowd or whatever you would call it, the circle.
Yeah.
It seems to be a lot more focused on like responsibility more. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
you can actually like better yourself. Like let's start with bettering yourself as a human being. And it's like, okay, that's responsibility. Like if you have a feeling, like okay, that's so does everyone else. But then responsibility is when you apply a set of like moral guidelines to it. When you apply morality to it, like okay, like I have to abide by this. I have to accept that no matter what I'm feeling at this moment, this is the way things are. Like this is morally wrong. I can't do this. Like no matter what I'm feeling.
Yeah, and that's an idea that's been as old as the fucking dirt beneath us. This idea that you cannot change the world unless you change oneself. Or yourself, excuse me. But, yeah, I mean, that's something as old as, like, Taoism. I mean, that's gone back for thousands of years, and that's sort of the same sentiment, entailed in that, is that, yeah, you can wish that the world was different, but, you've got to embody your beliefs. You've got to embody your principles in order to really affect others. And that's usually what I do in terms of applying anarchism and applying objective morality and voluntarism and et cetera, is that, words are cheap, honestly. I could sit here all day, I could type on my fucking blog and write entire diatribes explaining why other people are wrong and why I'm right, but that's not going to do shit until I embody those principles, until I can show people at the grocery store, show people at my workplace, show people out at the fucking mall while I'm trying to get, I don't know, a new pair of fucking pants. Until I show them that I embody those principles, none of it fucking matters, That's why they always say talk is cheap. Because unless you have the actions to back it up, and that's why that's so important, no one's going to care. Nothing's going to change. Everyone's just going to see you as a hypocrite with a couple of good ideas.
Yeah, and like the strongest case for a certain argument is to see the effects of it, kind of like if you're living your principles, and those principles are good principles, like if you're living a moral life, people are going to see that and they're going to be like, wow, that's something I want to be a part of. Like if you're again like an activist either on the far left and far right, and all you do is just like you said, just write things on the internet and complain, and like that's your whole life is just complaining on the internet, or just focusing on politics. It's like, well, whatever you're having, and like I want nothing to do with it because that's not a life I want. If you're living your principles and you're living a moral life, like people will see that and they'll be like, yeah, that's good. They're the arguments are one thing, but they're gonna see the effects and they're like, that's what I want. They're not just gonna think, okay, that's logical. They're gonna think that is something I want.
Yeah. And if you want to look at a sort of clear walking contradiction of an ideology. Compare collectivism to like polygamy and polyamory. It's this sort of idea that, oh, we should share one another, we should spread the love, and, no one should be jealous in this relationship, or, we should be able to bring other people in and share the love and share the resources and all this sort of good stuff. Well, how long does that end up lasting? For some people, it could be quite a while, but what is the result of that? Well, usually they end up suppressing a lot of their emotions, they end up limiting themselves in their expressions, and, when it comes to final decisions, they all end up getting their voices muted by the majority. And so it ends up being very shitty. So for those who end up lasting long in it, they fucking hate themselves. They hate their emotions. They hate their being. They fucking hate everything. And the ones that fucking end up breaking it off, they realize, hey, this is a fucking horrible idea, this fucking collectivism in action. It doesn't work out well. I end up having to stifle myself, the individual, in order to appease everyone else, which at this point I'm not all that fucking interested in. So, I mean, that's really collectivism in action if you look at them. And they're, oh god, my fucking dog is horking up a storm over there. Excuse that. Um, but yeah, it's absolutely horrible to see these people. Like I was watching this CNN documentary, which same thing with Yahoo. If you get the chance to, don't. Um, but I was watching this documentary on what they call plural relationships. Huh? And it's this one couple in particular. They're in the Midwest. I forget whether it's like in Oklahoma or Kansas or whatever. And they're bringing in this one woman who looks like she lives off of entirely fucking government subsidies because she's got this little tenement that she lives in with fucking no decorations or paintings. She doesn't have much of a penny to her fucking name. And she comes and lives with this couple somewhere else in the Midwest. And a lot of the motivation behind it, even though they tout all this, love and affection and all that bullshit, a lot of it seems to be driven by, fucking money. Money and like fucking sustaining the household and all that kind of bullshit and getting extra hands to work the farm. And it's like, well, Jesus, you guys claim to be selfless, but you're actually the most selfish and arguably the most greedy motherfuckers on the face of the planet for wanting to do it for just that reason. You're not in it for love. You're in it for the material. You're in it for the fucking good feels that it provides you in the moment. And so that's pretty much the embodiment of collectivism in action versus, supporting capitalism or libertarianism. You see a good many people that go out and like donate to charities. They end up forming organizations like the Oath Keepers, or like the hurricanes that hit Florida and Houston. You see organizations that come and help disaster victims, sort of get off their roofs and provide them with food and shelter and all that sort of thing. And they end up starting businesses which benefit communities and so on and so forth. That's capitalism in action. And so sort of comparing the two, you sort of see who really does embody their ideals and their principles more, and that's the capitalists and the libertarians and the anarchists.
Yeah, and it's what when you brought up like the case of or polygamy. There, I'll link this in the description. There was an article I read not too long ago from I think Rothbard read it, but I'll find it. But on when there was a communist society in, I think it's pronounced Munster, in Germany.
Munster,
but this was
yeah.
Munster, yeah. Forever ago, I can't remember. It was like the 1500s or something. But they set up a communist society, and like they were into it. It was like it was an Anabaptist society, I think. They were so into it that they had mandatory polygamy.
Oh God!
people actually rebelled because they're like, this is ridiculous. Like they made any kind of like marriage between two people illegal, or they abolished any sort of like commitment between two people and just made it was polygamy for everyone, because that's ideal collectivism to them. Like the most collectivist form was like you cannot like free polygamy for everyone, and of course there was a rebellion, and then they were just like, okay, and they executed all the people that rebelled. And it's like, it's like, holy crap, like that is for collectivists and communists, that is the embodiment of their principles. It's like mandatory polygamy and killing anyone that disagrees. It's like, yeah,
God,
like,
such a weird concept too. It's like fuck other people or die. It's like,
yeah,
oh God, like what? Why would you ever wish that on someone? What if you truly loved someone and then you made it law that they must go out and fuck other people, or else you will imprison them or kill them on the spot? That is
yeah,
truly.
that's what it was, because I think they looked, and they had some like abnormal. It wasn't an equal level of women to men or something. I think it was like 4 men for every one, or something like 4 women for every 1 man. It's in the article, so whoever's curious could look at it. But it wasn't equal. So people were looking at that, so the state was looking at that and saying, like, that's unfair. Like, some people are going to be in certain relationships while others aren't going to. So that was their logic for polygamy. It was like, okay, this is going to create inequality, and we need to stop inequality.
Jesus.
So it's like, geez, when you apply these types of principles, it's like you can see what happens right there, mandatory polygamy, and like anyone with any sense is going to look at that and say, I don't want anything to do with that.
God, let's hope the feminists don't get a hold of that article. Jesus.
Yeah, and I think it was the same place where, or I think it was Rothbard who made the case that, like, talking about like individualism and collectivism, which seems to be a huge debate on the right now. Like, looking at collectivism, like, all the collectivists seem to say, like, individualists they're selfish, or they're like, it's just going to be an isolated society where everyone can't associate with one another because they're individualists and they're all every man for himself. And it's like, no, when you actually look at individualist societies, you get communities, you get groups, you get people voluntarily associating with one another, which is great. You look at collectivist societies, and it is as isolated as possible, because nobody can be themselves. Because if you're yourself, you're different from everyone else, and different is wrong. You have to all be equal. So it ends up people just like are just caricatures of themselves, because if they show anything different than another person, or if they try to like if they prefer to associate with one person rather than another, that's choice, and that's inequality, and that's wrong. And it's like, no.
Yeah. It's just it shows so much in collectivist ideologies that they all look the same, they all talk the same, they all parrot the same fucking rhetoric that they've heard from one source or another. And it's sort of like the collectivist stance, like, we all must be a forest, we can't be individual trees, versus individualism, where we are all trees, but we can become a forest, of our own voluntary association, assuming that, I don't know, the trees are ents or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, it's just so radically different to see, the sort of two talking points between the two. And it's really absurd when I hear from collectivists saying that individualism will fail because everyone will just be for themselves. Well, there's a reason why the popular phrase exists. Man is not an island. He must have others to sort of commune with in order to be happy and to truly be part of society. Because you can, if you wanted to, set up your own farm way out in the fucking sticks, where you got all of your livestock, all of your fucking water source, and you generate your own electricity. But then that lifestyle kind of sucks if you don't have anyone else to share it with, to be able, let's say you had a plumbing issue in your house and you couldn't fix it. Well, if you live all the way out on your own, you're kind of SOL unless you figure out how to fucking be a plumber. But if you live with a community of other people who associate with each other voluntarily, you can trade goods, you can exchange services, for goods, or just do it out of the kindness of your own heart, and that's all okay. But under a collectivist regime, you all must, take part of this fucking animal farm kind of place. You all have to do your job, otherwise you're either off the farm or you're shot dead or imprisoned, etc., etc.
Yeah, and that's not like, in putting yourself in a group like that, or in a community, I should say, like, because the terminology, I have to be very careful with the terminology here. Like, that is not collectivism, to be part of a community if it's voluntary, if it's like, because when it comes to like collectivism, like, remember that it's individuals sacrificing themselves for the group, because the group is what matters. Whereas for individualists, it's the group is formed for the benefit of the individuals. Like, and
Yeah.
how best to form a society what's the best way to form a group that benefits everyone? Let people decide whether they want to be part of this group or that group, or it's like that's the only way to do it, is to just from bottom up, like a
Yeah.
bottom up way of organizing society. It's like that's just how it's going to work. And that's like you can see individualists are living their principles, and you get pretty great societies. You see collectivists taking the logical conclusion of their principles, and it's just hell.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, mandatory polygamy, and like I'm reading through the Gulag Archipelago right now, and it's like, damn, that ruins your entire day if you listen to it, because it's like just taking collectivism and applying it to its conclusion. It's like, oh my god, just so many people dying.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's what you get, or not like that's what the people deserve, but like that's the outcome. That's the outcome of what happens.
Exactly.
Because all you're doing is you're just taking logic, you're taking some base assumptions, which are wrong if you're a collectivist, and you're just applying them logically, and it's like, yeah, that's what you get. Whereas, again, if we like bringing it back to objective morality, if we come up with these good principles of voluntarism and voluntarism and individual freedom, and you apply them to their logical conclusions, and it's like, hey, things turn out pretty great, believe it or not.
And you don't have to sacrifice your emotion as well. You don't have to sacrifice your appearances. You don't have to sacrifice anything in order to function in a voluntary individualist society. You just, I mean, they just sort of are in those three rungs. It's like ethics and morals are important, then comes thoughts and feelings, and then comes the social graces and appearances. You don't have to give any of that up in order to make society run. Whereas with the collectivist, you have to give, the pretty much everything up. Honestly, you have to compromise you end up compromising your own values and principles in order to support and let grow this abstract idea that's very Platonian in actuality, and ends up collapsing on itself like a house of cards.
Yeah, it's it's like, yeah, that's just how it is. It's just it ends up terribly, and it's like if you let people, it's a weird combination, because like if you let people do whatever, there's two things you have to have. Like you have to have individual freedom, like let people do what they want, and then you have to have like that level of responsibility, like you have to have that moral system on top. Because if you let people do whatever they want, it's like that's good. Like let them do whatever they want. But then
Yeah, and that's the big
if you have
that's
that
the big
moral
confusion
system,
that people have with like anarchism, is that they think it's just absolutely no rules whatsoever. But it's no matter what kind of society you're aiming for, there always has to be that sort of self-regulation involved. Externally, anarchism is about getting rid of rulers and controllers that wish to apply what they feel and think over you. But when you're just controlling yourself, you're letting the consequences, be it negative or positive, apply to you and sort of take impact on you. You're making your decisions much more intelligently, and you're correcting your own behavior, and you're modeling and embodying the principles and the emotions and thoughts and feelings, etc., that you actually want to instill into others. And so yeah, it's always crazy whenever I hear that, anarchism, would just lead to just complete chaos and stuff like that. It's like, no, we already exercise anarchism in our day-to-day lives. I mean, we rarely ever, like, unless you're like speeding on the highway and a cop pulls you over, we rarely run into an instance where the law is actually enforced. We usually just rely on ourselves and our good judgment and our principles to guide us through the day. And so to hear someone say, hey, you need something or someone else in order to make you act right, in order to have you act in a moral manner, well, that's just not true. And more often than not, when you have that external factor coming in and forcing you to do something you don't want, chances are you're more encouraged to do something that is immoral or unethical.
yeah, and come to like talking about anarchism, of course, we mean anarcho-capitalism, which, again, like you said, doesn't mean anarchism doesn't mean no rules. It means no rulers. So, at least in an anarcho-capitalist society, you don't have any rulers, but you do have like a set of guidelines. You have a set of moral principles that allow people to like they abide by these principles, because if they don't, it's to their own detriment and not to anyone else's. Whereas, I don't know if anyone knows about this, but there is actually a air quotes anarcho-communist society out in California. Like it's a very like it's out in the middle of the desert. It's an old it's like an old military base or something, or an old fort that they live in now. But I'll post a link to it in the description. And it's technically not real communism, because they're living off of government subsidies, and they go to the nearest city to get their food.
Yeah.
So, but like, when you compare the two societies, where you think like in, say, an individualist anarcho-capitalist society, you have, like you said, people already do most of their lives are already their own. Like there's not some ruler telling them what to do. They live their own life for the most part.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, take the anarcho-communist society in this example, like I don't know who actually went and interviewed but there is a guy that went around and interviewed each of them, like, what do you think of this society? And it's like, it's terrible. Like, one woman was like, yeah, some guy went and set fire to my house last week. And it's like, okay.
Jesus.
Like, it is full what you would think of when you think of, when the average person thinks of anarchism. Like, people just go around and steal stuff, and they just set things on fire just cause. And it's like, wow, like, that's a society without any sense of morality. They don't have... That's the subjective morality standpoint of where it's like, okay, I wanted to do this, so I did it. Whereas when you have a rigid set of moral principles that a group of people are like, okay, this makes sense to us, this is what we accept, then society really isn't all that bad.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that do work out usually kind of follow the sort of mutual or anarcho-mutualist sort of deal, where it's kind of like communist China. They wanted to sort of go with communism, but they realized it wouldn't work, so they sort of implemented like barter and like fucking using currencies and stuff like that. So more often than not, the other anarchos usually end up, if I could borrow a quote from Megadeth, kind of like military intelligence, two words combined that can't make sense. You know what I mean? So it ends up being like a self-contradictory kind of deal. And they exist all over the place. I know there's another one up in Northern California. For the life of me, can't remember the fucking name of it. But all I know about it is that like this pedophile teacher and like his 16-year-old quote unquote girlfriend ended up trying to go up there and just to sort of evade the cops on their run to Mexico. That didn't work out all too well, and they exist in like New Hampshire. Old Bernie Sanders was a part of one commune up in Vermont. It was kind of like this geodesic dome kind of deal. That doesn't work out. They have kibbutzes in the Jewish culture. Don't really know how well they fare, but just considering how few people know about them, it probably not all that well. So, I mean, it never really works out, because it's ignoring the true human factor, which is the self. And once you ignore that, nothing else will really work out in your favor or anyone else's favor around you. Because once you ignore the self, your own needs, your own wants, your desires, your want to better the things around you and for others, once you ignore that, then life just becomes meaningless. I mean, not in the sort of absurdist sense to where there's no set purpose for life. It becomes without any meaning whatsoever, objective or subjective.
Yeah, and that's another benefit to think about. Like, that's another benefit to a strict set of like moral codes of when you have a moral standard of this is moral and this is immoral, like, you have something to strive for. You have, like, if this is what being a moral human being is. I mean, we don't start out as people that are perfect. We have to work for something, and that allows people to say work for something better. Because you see like people in these societies where it's all anything goes, and it's like they go nuts because we can't just kind of sit around and be like, this is life. Like, we have to have something to work for. And at least if we come up with a good set of moral guidelines, it's like that allows people to say, okay, here's something I can aim for. Which I mean, when it comes to religion, you have some like societies where people use religion to do whatever they want, like to do some pretty awful things. Like again, the that communist society in Germany back in the 1500s was pretty damn immoral with mandatory polygamy. Like they were
Right.
incredibly religious. But you have some other people where it's like they need a set of moral guidelines, and if you give it to them, they'll be like, okay, this is something I can work for. This is something. This is a destination that I can aim at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, otherwise, what else is there to live for? I mean, honestly, we just end up fighting for our immediate needs and what's pragmatic in the moment. So we just end up killing each other for each other's food or for our houses or for, I don't know, our fucking Netflix subscription. It's just ridiculous. When you really think about it in that sort of light, this sort of collective thing, this entity as it is just it's just about the immediate wants. It's like it's reverting back to childhood, honestly. And that when you hear a lot of the arguments that these people sort of tend to bring to the table, you hear a lot of those same arguments, and that's kind of why in the essay I sort of compare the 7-year-old to the BLM member. Because, take away some of the nouns in there, it's, oh, but I didn't do it on purpose, but what about what I feel? Don't my thoughts and feelings matter? I'm a person too, damn it. I wasn't wrong for this, and it just goes on and on and on and on, and it's just absolutely depressing to see, how these people just in a matter of a moment, once they're caught in the act, just sort of revert to like these toddlers who have been caught stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar. And it's just like, Jesus, man, because you decide to live in such an immoral manner, because you decide to excuse all of your negative actions because of what you feel in the moment, you have caused so much damage. You've caused such a detriment to the collective intelligence and integrity of the human race. And it's just miserable to watch. Some of these people argue what they argue for. You know, so that
And
that
you can tell these people don't have like any moral standards because, like you said, when they're arguing, like, what about what I want? What about my needs? It's like, okay, if you live your entire life by what do I want, it's like that's how you're gonna end up. Just like that. It's like the nice, like if you actually take some responsibility for yourself, then eventually you come to realize that it's like, okay, let's take a practical view of the world. Let's take a moral view of the world, and let's figure stuff out. Let's do something. Let's do something. Whereas these people are, once they start whining, it's like that's all you have, isn't it? That's all you have is just whining. It's just everything's
and
based on this is what I feel, therefore that's all you have as an argument.
yeah, that's kind of like what's been going on with like the Parkland deal, like the students getting out and like they're planning on going to like Washington D.C. to carry on their fucking crusade against guns, and like these are kids who they probably haven't taken a civics class because I'm sure that doesn't exist in public schools anymore. They they probably are still in high school. They probably haven't graduated yet, so they're still mentally maturing, and they probably just have turned voting age, so they probably have no concept whatsoever, compounding with the other facts of how the political system works and what they're arguing for, what consequences that will bring. And, being from Florida myself originally, I know a lot of people that love guns. It's a gun culture. You're just raised with them. There's nothing wrong with it. And because they were involved in a mass shooting, because the parents of Nicholas Cruz didn't give enough of a fuck, they abandoned their moral responsibility to make sure their child got the proper treatment that he did, because they abandoned moral principles and probably abusing the child in order to make him so demented and such a antisocial person. Which some people argue that he's schizophrenic, but people were quoting saying that he hears voices in his head. The main difference between a schizophrenic and someone who's just pretending to be one is that the schizophrenic actually claims that the voices are like you and I talking, like not in our heads, but like they're an actual person outside of themselves having a conversation, and the other ones, they're just trying to, I don't know, get free medication. But anyways, so yeah, they abandoned their moral responsibility, not just the parents, the adoptive parents of Cruz, but the ones who took him in after his mother died, of making sure that there was a Dr. Phil interview last night where the parents that took him in said, yeah, he was allowed to bring his guns in, and we made him get a safe, but we had a key, but he didn't. We didn't know that he had another key. Well, it's like, well, you've obviously heard from your son because their sons were friends. You've obviously heard that this kid is mentally unstable. You've seen his social media posts. You've seen how he acts and online, and some of the feelings that he's expressed. Is it not your moral obligation as a father, as a husband, as an owner of this house, to ensure that someone you are bringing into your home to live there is safe, and that all the other people in your house are safe? Shouldn't that have been something that you checked to make sure that this guy wouldn't just on a whim go and do what he ended up doing, which is going on a fucking killing spree? I mean, that could have been in his house, that could have been in his neighborhood, for all they fucking knew. So the moral obligation was thrown away there. And so you see all these things compounding that led to this incident, which is a bunch of people decided to say, "Oh, this isn't my responsibility. This isn't my deal. I did the best I could. I did what I needed to do," which obviously they didn't. The kid had been like a year or so off of medication. He had stopped seeing his therapist whenever he wanted to. He showed up for school, but the parents he was with then, they never really made him go to school. So there was no reinforcement of principles and ethics and morals in that household or the household of his adoptive parents. So it's not the gun that we should be looking at. It's not that. It's one an application of good morals and ethical values, as well as making sure that when you have a kid that is mentally unstable, ensuring that not only for their well-being but for the well-being of others, that they get the proper care and treatment that they could possibly get. And that doesn't mean always sticking them on SSRIs. It doesn't always mean sticking them into an institution. In some instances, actually a lot of them, that ends up being a lot worse because, well, psychiatry and pharmaceuticals intended for psychiatric medications hasn't really progressed since the 50s, and it's more or less like a shot in the dark kind of deal in seeing whether or not they work. So it's just a matter of getting them doing absolutely everything you possibly can within reason to ensure that not only you are safe, not only they are safe, but everyone else around you is safe. And that was ignored in that instance. So their whole fucking crusade to Jacksonville, around their community in Parkland, and soon to be up in Washington, which is funded by I think Soros, and then fucking Oprah Winfrey and someone else chucked in some money in order for them to go up to Washington and do their whole spiel. But it's just fueled by this fear, this primal fear that something terrible happened to them in the moment, and they don't know what to do with that fear. They haven't processed it, and they're advocating for these things that will have very, very permanent consequences in the future. People are already talking about putting police officers in school with well, not AR-15s, but with rifles on school. There are already cops there on school. They just have pistols. So obviously, police on campus isn't doing the job. What they need is to have a fucking M16 or some shit like that. Like, that'll do the trick, right? No, it's just a matter of applying those principles and making sure that you are doing everything you absolutely can right in order to prevent this. And honestly, if I were a parent at one of the kids that go to school in a public school system, I would definitely at this point take them out, because the public school system is the most dangerous place for a child to be right now. Not because of mass shootings, but because of gang violence, because of fights that regularly break out, because of sexual predation on the parts of school administrators, teachers, and police officers, believe it or not, at the school, as well as the fact that they actually don't teach anything there. It's all focused on benchmark testing and then just fucking push them out the fucking door so that way they can graduate.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's such a good point that when we look at this shooting that just happened, it's like there were so many moments, there were so many times that like people could have done something about it. There's so many times like that people failed to take that responsibility. Like people knew that, or I guess the students knew that like this kid, like yeah, if anyone was going to shoot up a school, it was going to be him. Like obviously the parents, like they knew that there was something wrong with the kid, and if they didn't know, they should have known. Like that's your job as a parent, and the adopted parents. And like you said, it's just like there's so many other things here that have failed. Why are we jumping straight to guns? And when it comes to the gun argument, like I never understood that, because I think anyone, like any sane person, can agree that everyone from like across the spectrum of what you think of guns, we're all on the same side of school shootings are bad. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know any pro-gun person that's like, yeah, guns are gonna cause school shootings, but what? Like, I want to keep my AR-15, so I want my gun, and I'm just if people have to die, I'm fine with that. Like, no one thinks that.
Yeah.
No one thinks that. Everyone's like, okay, we want to stop this. How are we going to do it? And the gun debate just seems so cheap now. It's like, okay, at this point, we know that like one side might get an inch. It seems that that's always what happens. Like after a shooting, sometime depending on what state or where it happened, like the pro-gun people might get an inch, or the anti-gun people might get a little inch in whatever they're advocating for in terms of legislation. But in the end, it's like, okay, this isn't working. Like we're gonna have about 50 more school shootings before either side gets their way. So
Yeah.
if we really are interested in stopping this, why don't we talk about so many people knew that this kid that this might happen with this kid. Like his social media, I guess he posted everywhere saying like, yeah, I want to be like this school shooter, or I'm going to do that. Like it was pretty clear, and this seems the easiest way to stop it, and we didn't. So why is that?
And he used his own name, too. He used his own
Yeah.
name to post on Google, Nicholas Cruz, and the FBI's going, oh, we don't know who the hell this kid is. We don't know how to track him. It's like, bull fucking shit, you don't. You do fucking FBI raids on fucking grow houses all the goddamn time just based off a fucking credit card that was swiped. You're telling me you can't find who the fuck this person was just based off a comment made on YouTube when he's using his actual fucking name, and when he's posted shit on Instagram, and when when the cops have shown up to his house 39 fucking times, you don't know who this child is? That's just complete and utter bullshit.
Yeah, it's like I understand. Like I understand that you're taking all of our information, like everything, like this conversation now. Even if we weren't recording it, we're probably going to end up somewhere on some server. And like every text I've ever sent is on some server somewhere probably. And it's like you have all this information. You're taking all this information from me, and because I might like one day become a terrorist or something, but this kid like is actually going out and saying these things, and it was completely ignored. It's like you've taken every little bit of information you could possibly get to figure this stuff out, and you still failed.
Yeah, it's absolutely egregious
It's frustrating.
Yeah. Oh.
It's like it just needs to stop. Like we have the solution right here. Like we have all the tools. The thing is, it's like, okay, if we get stronger background checks, or if we ban the AR-15, like you think that's gonna stop? Like this kid had the key apparently to his adopted parents' gun closet, and they knew about it. And it's like,
Oh no, it was his own gun closet. He gave the
his own gun closet.
Yeah, that was one of the stipulations in order to move into his own house, which sounds practical, but the fucking dad was a dope and didn't check to see if there was another fucking key to the safe. So that's why the fucking responsibility lies on him. It's like, you need to check to see if that fucking crazy motherfucker has another key to the safe, and make sure that his guns are locked up at all times. And you failed at that.
Yeah, it's like you want a solution. Here are like 10 different solutions. Here, I get 39 different times the police could have done something, or the system could have done something, and the system is not working. And it's like you can't. It's like in every other argument where it's like, okay, if it's not working, we just need more money, or we need more something. It's like, okay, we know it's not working, so let's try something different.
Yeah. And that's why I say to parents, just take your kids out of school. It's the most dangerous place you could possibly be, putting aside that gun violence deal. It's just horrible for your children. They end up with lower self-esteems. They end up with more fucking social hang-ups. I mean, you hear stories all the time, in the media, in person-to-person conversations of how, like, a couple of instances growing up in school changed their entire fucking lives. How they speak, how they fucking act. And it's horrible. That's why I implore people to engage in like homeschooling now. This is a hell of a lot cheaper. I actually ended up doing an interview with a fellow Minds blogger named Ren Blogger on the issue, and it is stupid cheap. It's like the most she chips in is like somewhere between like 400 and 500 bucks for like the whole year. Compare that to like the tens of thousands the government spends on one child per year. Just one fucking child. It's ridiculous. So I implore parents, figure out a way to where you can schedule to homeschool your children to make sure they're getting a quality education, because putting them in public schools will kill them. And if it doesn't kill them, it will scar them for fucking life, and it will deprive them of any kind of quality education that they can possibly get. I mean, what was it, a couple months back, in Baltimore, kids were going to schools where they had no fucking heat, and they were sitting in the classroom fucking shivering their balls off in 20-degree fucking classrooms. And this is after the fucking multiple fucking funds thrown at the fucking Baltimore public school system, and they did fuck all with it. They just squandered it away. And so it's not a place for children, these public school systems. It's really a prison for children. It's just like a big child care prison where they'll go there for like 8 hours of the day, and then they end up dedicating the rest of their day to like fucking doing homework. Otherwise, they get chastised or thrown out of fucking school.
Yeah, it's like public. Like I went to actually, according to them, at least one of the best public schools in like at least the state of Pennsylvania. And overall, I thought it was a pretty good school. Like we never had. As far as I know, there weren't any fights in school. There wasn't that many. There was weed. Like we had weed. That was it. In terms of drugs, that was the extent, as far as I know. And I would think I would know if there was more. But it was a pretty good school. And it's like even then, I wouldn't put my when I have kids, I won't put them in that school,
right?
Because it's like, again, I'm speaking from like of all the public schools I could have gone to, I went to one of the best, and it's like even then, every time I'd read a book or something, it'd be like, why didn't I learn this?
Oh yeah,
like why didn't I learn this or that? And it's like, it's just like I knew when we went under like when Michelle Obama did her whole like school lunches thing. I remember just how funny it was of the way our school lunches worked. Of like, they had to have like a fruit, or you had to have a fruit or something,
right?
And you weren't allowed to like not get one. So I mean, honestly, like the teachers actually, this one teacher, I guess, lived on a farm and had horses, and actually like set up a separate bin for the kids to put all their fruit because they kept pitching it. It's like, yeah, this isn't working. And one of the fruit options was like a slush puppy. It's like
a slush puppy?
Yeah, like the slushy things. And it's like, that's not a fruit.
Oh God!
But apparently it was by government standards. And it's like yeah, these are such minor complaints compared to like what you just said. Certain Baltimore schools not having heat. It's like, even then, it's like I wouldn't do it. It's like that's no. This is not a place to put a child.
No, absolutely
in
not.
any situation. It's like the top down system is not working, and that's another case for like just self responsibility. It's like teach your own kids. Like even then, like hire a tutor for something. I don't know. Like it has to be on a much more bottom up level. Like, you can't just throw them in the system and expect them to come out okay, because that's where all the school shooters come from. Or, like, the school shooter kids, it's like they were just kind of thrown into a school. No one, like, they all have issues as far as I can tell. At least every time I look into one, they all have certain issues that, like, they were adopted, or they had, like, their family, there was something wrong with their family. They didn't get, they were never, like, they never had friends in school. Like, they were always dropping out of school, or they were always having trouble in school, and it's like, it's not working.
Yeah, and almost all of them, I think actually all of them, were all on some kind of SSRI or psychotropic medication in order to influence their way of thought. Which, ooh, excuse me, if you don't know a lot about SSRIs and things like that, they, like I said before, they're a lot more like a shot in the dark kind of deal in order to fix it. Sort of like how Ritalin and things like that are meant to fix ADHD. They're stimulants meant to treat people who are fucking hyperactive. That's like someone who's already on edge and giving them fucking cocaine in order to even them out. It's fucking ridiculous. And some people, the only reason why they keep doing it is because some people sort of vary, on the effects. And usually that means either someone becomes a lot more hyperactive or they become so hyperactive that the brain fucking shuts down and they become zombies, which you see a lot of the fucking kids in school end up doing because it's not a matter of they're not able to pay attention. It's like they're not going outside enough and burning off all the fucking energy that they need to in order to fucking sit still and sit through a lesson and actually learn. So a lot of the fucking school shooters were one on some sort of medication to help them with anxiety, depression, chronic aggression, so on and so forth. And usually they had a major loss in their life, someone died, as well as they also had relationship issues. I think that was the case even with the VTech guy. Like he had a really fucking shitty relationship. That was definitely the case with what is it, the San Bernardino guy, the really weird guy that wrote like a manifesto about how he couldn't get chicks and like after the shooting every fucking chick should fall at his fucking knees or some shit. And then the same thing with this Parkland shooter is that he fucking had this girlfriend break up with him because he was fucking crazy, she was a bitch, and they sort of parted ways, and he ended up getting into a fight with the new boyfriend and all that sort of deal. So there's always those sort of connections, but it all boils down to, was this guy taken care of psychologically? Was he going to see a therapist regularly? Was his home life good enough? And if it wasn't, why wasn't anyone reporting on this? Why wasn't anyone making enough of an emphasis to say, hey, you're being a shitty parent, stupid. Stop being a shitty parent, you know?
Yeah, and I probably have way too much experience, more experience than I should have talking to people that are like considering suicide, and it's like the more I learn about them, it's like, or most of them are in hospital settings, but most of them, it's like,
Yeah.
they have problems at home. Like it's not just they were born with a genetic disorder and they're more depressed. It's like no, they have problems. Like the vast majority of them are because their parents are terrible human beings. But it's like,
Oh yeah, it's very
yeah,
rare for
it's
someone to have like a psychological disorder because they were born with it at birth. The only way that applies is usually with something like schizophrenia or chronic aggression, but most of that is usually epigenetic, to where something in their environment triggers that. So a lot of schizophrenics, they usually become schizophrenic, or it starts manifesting itself around the early teens, and so usually sometimes they'll get skipped over because, well, they might have a shitty environment, but it just doesn't activate that little code in their system. Or sometimes because of that, because they, fucking were fucking beaten every day, or because they were, I don't know, like just take an example from one of my schizophrenic friends, were forced to eat their own fucking vomit and shit like that, just horribly abused. Yeah, horrible shit. That activates, that triggers that code saying, hey, schizophrenia, let's go. And yeah, that's
yeah,
how that sort of happens sometimes.
that's
And
a surprising, like a lot of like people that don't like have never taken a genetics class like tend to think it's like nature versus nurture, and that's like a very like no people like people that are in the field of genetics have been like that's long gone, that they haven't talked about that for decades now, like, or it's a simple way of putting, I should say.
yeah,
Now it the debate is more it's not even much of a debate, but it's all okay, they both play a part in the sense of we have so many different like the human genome is so complicated and a lot of it is shut off. Like we have the DNA that will make us more likely to have this or this or this, and it's dormant, and then the environment can then activate it, kind of thing. Like you were saying, where there are a lot of these pathways of DNA, so it's genetic in that we have these sets of codes, but they're only activated by the environment. So then that's where the environment part comes in, and it's like, sure, I assume a lot of these people probably have like they're they probably have certain things that'll make them more likely to experience depression or PTSD or something based on their environment. But it's like you just like certain examples. It's like there's no way someone can go through this in life without becoming messed up in a sense.
Right.
Like it's just seeing these certain people. It's like, yeah, no wonder. Like you can to anyone like that knew anything about their life from like had to have known. Like nobody can when you just learn a little bit about someone's life that really has like a messed up family. It's like this is where it's coming from.
Yeah. And it's just like the system won't pick up the slack for it. I mean, like, did you know about the Daddy 05 scandal that went on YouTube?
Oh, I vaguely looked into it. If you could summarize it for me.
Okay, so the basic gist is this. It's a channel, or was, a channel dedicated to prank videos. So it was this dad, and then sometimes you'd have the wife come in on it, or some of the other kids. And the primary target was the youngest, Cody. And, sometimes they'd play pranks on the dad, sometimes they'd play pranks on the mom, but it was obviously scripted. The ones that seemed a lot more genuine, the ones that seemed like they were actually playing a really, really fucked up joke on the child, it was usually geared at Cody. And so they'd make all these different videos, just sort of pranking Cody, and you'd see signs of him exhibiting the beginning of like antisocial disorder, of high anxiety or acute anxiety, excuse me, and different things like that because he would, at the slightest sign of confrontation, he would just break out into this sort of hysteria, and he was also smearing poop all on the walls, which is one of the telltale signs of severe emotional distress as well as other disorders, that and wetting the bed. And so you saw all these different things, and then people on YouTube they reported it, never really got fucking done away with it. Then Minds caught on to it, made a huge big deal out of it, conjoined with YouTube. CPS came up to the house, and then the fucking parents put out this whole apology video. It's like, oh no, it's just all a big joke. We never really abused our child, even though in one video they end up fucking slamming his poor little fucking child, Cody, into a fucking a bookshelf, like a short little wide bookshelf that maybe goes up 4 feet, something like that. Slam him into his head, into the fucking the bookshelf, and he ends up crying in bed, and he yells at him as a joke and shit like that. And CBS came to the house. I think he was removed from their care. He's attending therapy now, so it's all well and good now. But it's kind of that's sort of the deal. It's like you had that responsibility. You knew what was going on. You knew what you were doing was wrong, and you did it because jokes, feels, all that sort of shit. And it's that ignoring responsibility, ignoring what is right, what is ethical, that led to that sort of behavior. And that's what ends up fucking up children, is when parents are shitty, and that activates those things like high anxiety, severe emotional distress. Well, not necessarily severe emotional distress, but things like the acute anxiety, depression, and things like that. That's really when that happens, is when things like that, the home life, trigger those diseases to come on in. And
a lot of it's like
you gotta
just
fix that.
common sense. Yeah, a lot of it's common sense when you think about it. Like the thing is like the thing about all these different pathways in our DNA is that like it's there for a reason, in a sense. Like it's there for allowing us to adapt to our surroundings. And if you have a child that's raised like it's assumed by like I don't know, biology or whatever you call it. Like it's a weird metaphor, but it's assumed by whatever that the home life is similar to reality around it. Like that the home life is a buffer for the world around you. So if you have a kid that's raised in the home life is scary and unsafe, and there's an issue there, like if the child doesn't feel safe at home, like they're going to feel anxiety. And that's because you don't want a child that has no anxiety living in a world where everything's dangerous, because you're not going to be able to predict danger when it's right in front of you. So if you're in a home where the parents might like beat you, or they might be like you might say something wrong and they flip a switch, and then it's abuse of any kind, like the child then has to adapt to, okay, so the world around me is dangerous. I have to be on edge all of the time. I have to assume that everyone around me is out to get me. Because it's like, okay, who is the person you would assume is the most likely to protect you or to care about you the most? And it's, okay, your mother or anyone in your immediate family. So it's like, okay, if these people if your own parents are not out for your best interest, then you have to assume that the rest of the world is also out to get you. And it's like, that's what happens. Like, that's what happens, where it's just a constant anxiety. And you can't really trust anyone, because it's like, okay, if you can't trust your immediate family, how are you going to trust anyone else? And it's like, that's how you mess up a kid.
Yeah, and it sets a precedent for the future. Like for instance, like spanking. Like for most people of the older generations, Gen X and the Boomer generation, they grew up being spanked, and to come out into the world and talk about this, it's a shock to them that other children of their age weren't spanked. It's like, oh yeah, I remember when I don't know, I got into the cookie jar when my mom wasn't having it, and then she decided to spank me. It's like, you interact with these other people, and they go like, what? Why the fuck would they beat you over that? That's fucked up. And you sort of get this moment of like, oh, was that really bad? And they don't know it. They don't understand that this is not the norm. And so that sets the precedent that they should continue that behavior, or that because they were raised this way, they were more likely then to continue that violence, to continue that bad behavior. And so that's where you see a lot of that cycle of violence, as it's called, continued on, especially when it comes to abuse and neglect. You get one child that was beaten as a child, they're more likely to end up beating their own children or other children, or if they were molested as a child, and they just had a sort of unhealthy knowledge of sexuality, they're more compelled to then continue on that sort of sexual predation in their own lives. And that's not a absolute rule. Obviously there are some survivors of sexual predation who then go on to, never have kids, one, and then two, never, predate on anyone. But, that's sort of the driving factor is either you tend to mimic what your parents did, or you just abstain from it entirely, and then you end up having a very perverted and distorted view on sexuality and on abuse and on neglect and so on and so forth. So it's very important that we set good moral principles, good ethics, and good precedents for how our children go forward in the future, because otherwise you will get more people like Nicholas Cruz, you will get more people like the VTech guy, you will get more people that are like John McCain or Nancy Pelosi and things like that. People who end up being very violent or very sociopathic, and they get out into society and see that because they are fucked up and because of the things that they know, they can take that and sort of take advantage of others in the process of doing it.
Yeah, and like we do have to remember that when it comes to like how children are raised, like children are looking to their parents for what's normal. Like that's what you said about like how the cycle of violence continues, because if something happens to them, they're like, okay, this is normal. Like parents know best, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like this is what I should be learning from. So obviously it's like, okay, if my parents spanked me, then they must have had a good reason. Therefore, if I do this, that justifies spanking. Therefore, then it goes on to their kids. It's like, okay, if my kids did this and I got spanked for it, then that's okay, and it just continues. And it's like, I believe me, when I talk to some of these people, like with that had terrible parents with depression, it's like I can understand where it's weird how like everything's justified to them. Like if their parents hit them for doing something, like their parents just did something totally off the, like that we would consider just off the table, just messed up. To them, it's like they'll explain it to me and be like, no, I did this wrong. Like that's why it was okay for them to do it. They had a good reason. And it's like, holy crap, like that's scary, because remember that like if you're someone that got beaten as a kid and you're justifying it, which I mean, I guess for pure survival you kind of have to, because the last thing you want to do is go against your parents when they're 4 feet taller than you or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not going to turn out very well. So it's like if you're justifying this, then that means you have in your mind that this is okay. And it's like, okay, if it was okay for your parents to do it to you, that means it's okay for you to do it to someone else. And it's like, that's where you get, that's where the danger comes from.
Oh yeah, and you see that continued on in less direct examples, like for people growing up in ghettos and the projects, you see their parents divorcing and their mother or their father relying on the state for sustenance. They see people, getting into gangs and committing acts of violence, and they get involved in it too, or they see that and are sort of inspired by it. You see that continued on in this culture, and you see them excusing it in that very similar way that you would see spanking. And that's kind of where the just to tie it all back in, that's where the BLM thing sort of comes back in. It's like, oh well, they had a fucked up childhood, but it's all good. It's all part of the black experience or the Hispanic experience or the Aboriginal experience. To grow up in this oppression, and and it becomes this culture, this sort of thing that they can all get together on and sort of celebrate in a very sick sense. Like, for us, it's very odd to see someone celebrating the welfare state, to see someone celebrating gang violence, to see someone celebrating spanking, because that's something we acknowledge as wrong. That's something we acknowledge as immoral. But because they don't know that, because they grew up in an environment where that was just kind of the thing to do, they come up with excuses for it. They come up with emotional excuses for it because of all that buried and unrecognized hurt and anxiety that comes from it. And so that's where you get a lot of the visceral reaction that then springs forward when you mention spanking, when you mention abortion, when you mention all these different things. And you just gotta, it almost seems impossible to really break people from it, but as we are examples of it, it's possible. It's possible if you get yourself to a point where you are ready to learn, where you are ready to read into, analyze, and then accept a lot of these principles as your own. You will then come to know that, hey, this portion of my past was wrong. I reject it. This is how I plan to go in the future. And so that's what, I mean, that's sort of presumptuous to say that's what the goal of my essay was, but that's sort of a subnote in it. I want people to sort of read this and see, hey, I can better myself from this. I can at least read through it. Maybe I'll have some issues with certain parts of it, but I want people to at least read it and to apply it in their own lives and challenge themselves to be better because of it, and to sort of point out the other people in their lives who are sort of walking contradictions.
Yeah, and that's a good way to tie it all back
Yeah.
to the point in the end. But one thing with that I'm trying to like keep in mind all this time that like you kind of mentioned was the way I look at things is that there's always like something else in that there's always more to learn. And you say like people like when they have this in mind, like this is the way things are, this is the way it is, especially like related to childhood, and that this is the way things are and that's that. It's really hard to keep in mind that we're all like we know what we all know very little.
Yeah.
And that like you see these it's something that like I try not to say with like I try not to have I try to never have like a high ground in the sense, even though there are some cases where I think it's pretty justified. But like when it comes to learning different things, it's like these people are, I look at some people and it's like, wow, these people seem to like be stuck in their ways of this is the way it is and it can't be any different. If you disagree with me, you're a terrible person. And it's like there's a weird thing that I have to keep in mind that I might be that way too.
Yeah.
That of like, even though like I consider myself an ANCAP and I think I think we're the closest in a sense. We've got a lot of things right, especially when I think we're the best. We have the moral argument the best. But then I have to keep in mind that for all I know, we're like just 2% of the way there.
Right, yeah.
And it might be that like everyone else is 1% of the way there and we're the closest, but it's like we I think that's the best thing we can do to keep in mind that we all we're all there's always that much more to learn. Because as soon as we put ourselves in that spot of, oh, we figured it out, which I mean we should in some cases,
Yeah.
definitely when advocating for our argument, that if we put ourselves in this place of, oh, we've got it right, then someone else might come by and say, no, you've got it wrong, and they might be right, and we have no idea.
Yeah, and that's why in debates it shouldn't be about winning. It shouldn't be about, having dominance over another. A debate to me is an exchange of information. It's an exchange of, this is what I think is right. Challenge me. Show me your ideas, and I will either consider amending what I feel, or not I feel, what I know based on what you respond with, or I will retort with, a rebuttal or something like that. Just refuting what information you've given back to me. And it's a back and forth. It's never this sort of aggressive fight that sometimes we delve into and sometimes we'd like it to be at some points. But yeah, it's just an exchange. It's just a matter of switching ideas and seeing which one makes the most sense. And it's very difficult for some people, especially ANCAPs, to sort of to remember that once upon a time we were all statists, unless you grew up on this magical farm where you were just raised by anarchist parents. Then that's the one exception to the rule. But we were all like that in some regard or another. We were all irrational. We were all, emotionally charged in our debates. And so we have to remember to really, I don't really want to say step down to their level, but that's almost what it is step down to their level, arguing from a language that they know, and then getting them to a more intellectually honest and less emotionally high stakes territory, to where they know, hey, I'm comfortable talking with this guy. It's just a one-on-one conversation, just saying what's what, and I'm free to do it again. And that's the ultimate thing. That's the ultimate goal with any debate, is inviting more of it, inviting more of an exchange of ideals and opinions on different things. And it should never be closed off as much as, someone like Hans Hermann Hoppe would like it to be. It's like, oh, you should shame everyone who's wrong and you should, call them idiots and whatnot. It's like, no, that doesn't really help our cause at all. That doesn't help the idea that we are all individuals. We want to work together despite any minor differences we might have in opinion and thoughts and feelings. So that's what we got to work towards, is just getting each other to open up and to exchange those ideas and to feel comfortable in doing so as well, because that's a lot of where that viscerality comes from, is when you get onto a certain topic and then everyone clams up because they are just so emotionally driven by this topic, especially when it comes to abortion or the welfare state or guns. People always have that emotional stake in it, and that's where it's our jobs, especially as libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, to disarm that and to say, hey, I'm just the guy talking here. You're just another person talking. It's okay. We just got to exchange back and forth. I'll say what I've got to say. You've got to say what you've got to say. You might learn from it. You might not. That's all right. I've said my piece. And as long as we're learning from it, that's okay.
That is a good lesson to end it on. That's a better ending that, like, we could not have had a better ending to that. So I think if we can, we'll wrap it up here, because that's a good way to go.
I agree.
You're probably on my channel already. Link in the description to follow me if you haven't already. Volanarchist, where can they follow you?
You can follow me on minds.com/Volanarchist, Gab.ai/Volanarchist, even though I don't really fucking go on there all that much. And let me see. Let me just cheat and look at some of my tags on the old channel I've got here. I'm also on Twitter at twitter.com/Volanarchist, and that's pretty much it. The most efficient way to get a hold of me is through minds.com. So if you want to talk to me, give me a message, or just look through some of my stuff, look through minds.com.
And same here. If you want to talk to me, contact me via Minds. Talk to Volanarchist via Minds. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. This was fantastic. This is exactly like what my point is. The point I want to get across, that like how you just ended it, of let's talk, let's have a conversation, let's figure this stuff out.
Exactly. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Fantastic. And thank you all very much for listening.